Okay, once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and greetings everyone. This is Education Technology class. This is the second week of the semester, and today I'm going to I'm going to be talking about communication, types of communication, models of communication. Why do we need actually communication? The importance of communication and so on. And then at the end of the course, I'm going to be posting a question in e-learning so that I would just want to make sure that you got all the information that I was telling you in this class. Let's move on. So in this class, we will be focusing about communication in teaching and learning. How do we actually use communication in teaching and learning? But in order for us to use communication in teaching and learning, we need to understand the meaning of communication, the definition of communication, types of communication, and so on. And this is actually what I'm going to be explaining in this slides. We are going to talk about the models of communication, the concept of human communication, verbal, non-verbal, and so on, the applications of communication. How do we actually make benefits of communication in our teaching and learning process? So when we hear the word communication, what do we actually expect the meaning to be? Well, communication is any transferring for knowledge, all right? When I communicate to you, I'm talking to you, I'm speaking to you. So I'm transferring my knowledge right now to you, that I'm telling you about communication. So communication could be the word the word means the act of imparting news, knowledge, skills whatsoever. And then it could be defined as the act via body language and so on. And then communication could be the sharing information. Or so the process of communication is actually not an it's not a simple process. It consists of some very important elements that needs to be there in order to make the process of communication occur. So the first element that we need to be aware of is the source of information, the sender. I am the sender, and then I have a message. This message is the second element of the communication process, which means the information that I want to send to my audience. And then I have the medium of communication. I am communicating with you now via online, maybe, or YouTube, or this video that I'm creating. So the message, the information needs a third element, which is the medium of communication. And then we have the receiver that is supposed to receive our information that we have already conducted. But to make sure the receiver has already received our information, we need his or her feedback. So by giving us the feedback, we actually are aware of the information that already received by the receiver. So any communication process has basic communication elements, which are the message, as I mentioned before, which is the information itself, and then the transmitter encodes the message, which is the sender, that he needs to make sure this message is clear before sending it out to the audience. And then encoded message is transmitted, which is the medium tool, or the medium actually channel that we need to transfer this message through. And then encoded message is received, which by the receiver, and then the receiver decodes the message, which means the receiver is able actually to understand the meaning of our message by giving his or her feedback. So these are the main elements of any communication process actually to happen, to occur, right? All right, let's have a look at some of the communication models, starting with Shannon Weaver's model 1949, and he has 6 or 7 main elements in his model, which are the sender, number 1 element, which is the source of information, as I just mentioned before. And then we have the encoder, which is the sender. But for the sender to be able to send his message correctly, he needs to make it understandable for his audience, which is encoding the message before sending it out. And this message, this information, needs to be going through the channel, the medium of communication. And this channel needs to be free of any other elements that affecting us. For example, noise. Let's say that I'm teaching right now in a class, and some of the maintenance workers outside, and they are doing a very loud actually sound, and so that my students cannot actually hear me. So this is actually one of the noises that actually may affect the channel of hearing. They cannot hear what I'm talking about. So in order to make the communication process successful, I need to make sure the channel has no noise, free of noise. All right. And then when the receiver receives the message, he is going to decode this message to make it, make sure that he is aware of the meaning of this message. All right. And then finally, when he explain or decode this message, he will receive this message correctly and gives his feedback as the final elements. As we can see here, the feedback goes from the receiver to the sender, so that we make sure he got the message, our message, correctly. Moving on to our second model in communications, which is the Osgood model. This model actually is all about a circle. What goes around comes around, all right? So we actually have the same elements, but it's a different arrangement. We have the decoder, interpreter, encoder, and then we have the message, and it goes around and around. So we have the receiver, we have the sender, the message, and the receiver, and then the message goes around and around. Goes around means the feedback of the receiver to the sender as well. So it's actually pretty much the same process of communication between Osgood and Shannon. And then to Laswell's model, it's actually, as I mentioned, most of the models of communications are the same procedure but different terms. So here, as we can see here, first element is who, which is the speaker, which is the source of information, the sender as well. But he called it who, the speaker. And then what he needs to transfer the message, the information. And the channel, the medium of communication. And then to whom are the the people are going to receive this message, to whom are the audience of the information. And then finally, the effect, which is pretty much the same as the feedback. The effects: are the student able to understand the meaning of my message? So that's actually the same meaning of the previous model. Moving on to SRAM model. SRAM model actually has divided the process of communication into two main parts. First part is sender and the message, and then second part is the message and the receiver. But each part of these two parts has the same elements. The sender, which is the source of information that needs to be encode the message before sending the message out, and then the message itself has the medium of communication, which is the channel, and then comes the decoder, and then the receiver, which is the destination of the message. Moving on to Berlos SMCR model, which has four main elements: SMCR, source, message, channel, receiver. Any communication process in Berlos' mind, he needs to have four main elements to communication process to be continued or to be successful. So the source, whether it's attitudes, knowledge, culture, anything, any information that has to be actually transferred. And then the message, for example, the structure of the culture, the elements of the knowledge and social and so on. And then this message needs to be transferred through a channel. This channel could be seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting, whatsoever. So when we teach our students, we actually talk to them, speak to them, so they would hear us and see us at the same time. So in this case, we are using two channel of Berlos SMCR model. And then finally, the receiver, that he needs to understand or receive the knowledge that we are going to teaching, or the culture that we are trying to actually teach him, or the attitudes that we are trying to change, for example, in his personality, and so on. All right, let's see what types of communication that we have. We have the verbal, that is like a most common communication that we actually do in our lives, which is talking, speaking to each other. And then we have non-verbal, which could be body language, which could be just by looking at somebody and so on. And then we have the mediated, and then we are going to actually talk about each one of these types and what is the relation of these types to communication process. First, we have the verbal communication, the communication process that uses voice, language, words, speaking to each other. So the meaning or message that we want to deliver will be influenced by the voice, by the inflection, by the way that we are talking, by our tone, voice tone. If, for example, I'm shouting, if I'm very nice speaking, and so on. So all these variables that might affect our type of communication, if it's verbal communication. And then we have the non-verbal communication, which has so many types actually. It could be simple facial impression, body language, gesture, and so on. So what are the differences between verbal versus non-verbal? Actually, we as a human being, we only use verbal in our lives as 35% only, which is, could be very strange sometimes, because most of the time we actually look at each other. We actually express our facial expressions. We change our tone of voice by the eye contact, by the body language, and so on. And the third type of communication, which is the mediated, that use media. All right, it could be book, it could be TV, it could be movie, computer, internet, radio, etc. Any communication that use a tool or media, it is actually a mediated type of communication. So why do we actually need communication in education? As I mentioned earlier, without communication, there will be no education. So we need to make sure that we actually are able to communicate with our students, and our students are able to communicate with their teachers as well. So, for example, in face-to-face environment, learning in classroom, the demonstration, the feedback that we got from our students, all these are actually types of communication. Me going to the school and then speaking to my students, this is actually me communicating my students, and me asking the students questions and then they answer my question. This is their feedback. This is how I make sure they actually understood my lesson, for example. So why do we actually communicate? What is the purpose of communication? We communicate to inform, to let people know, to educate people, to actually pursue people if we want something from them. And then we communicate for our relationship, for our entertainment, for our entertainment, for our maybe we need to develop some knowledge, we want to develop some skills, we want to educate ourselves and so on. So this actually without a communication we will not be able to do anything in life. So communication is actually the core thing in life for you to move on in life. So communication is actually a very basic, very common thing that you need, and you as a teacher is actually, you are required for for more experience in communication among your students. So, as I mentioned, what is the purpose of communication? First, we have attitude change. We communicate with people because we don't like their attitude. We want to actually deliver information to change their attitude or value or emotions. We want to change their opinions, for example, to deliver knowledge, facts, principles, and formulas that can change the student's view or to gain more knowledge. To behavior change, we want, for example, our kids to change their behavior. So we would go communicate with them, speak with them to actually change their behavior. And then finally, to social change, we communicate to deliver true explicit knowledge and information for change, or to continue our relationship between individual or group. For example, if I don't communicate with my wife, this is not gonna work, so our marriage will end. So actually communication is very basic and essential in our life. All right, so why do we need to learn about communication? What is the importance of communication in teaching and learning? Well, simply because without an effective communication, there will be no education. So communication is one of the most foundations in teaching and learning process. So learning cannot be achieved without an effective communication between teacher and their students. And effective communication skills must be learned. All right, you need to learn the skills that you need to have in order to make communication effective. And communication, not just speaking or arranging idea, opinions and instruction, but it's more complex. For example, if you want to present your group project and your group members went out starting to actually play their presentation and they went reading from the slides, blah 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 blah. This is not communication, this is reading, and we are all aware and actually we are all know how to read, but in order for you as a teacher to communicate, you need to make your own way of communicating with your students. It's not about reading. You need to explain, you need to actually make kind of, body language, eye contact with your audience and so on. All right, do you remember, guys, when I first started in this slide? I said the channel needs to be free of noise. So the noise has actually many factors. Most of them are related to human factors, which is the expertise, the attitude, the communication skills. Actually, the lack of expertise, as for example, if you are an English teacher and you cannot pronounce words very well, this is actually one of the noise that going to affect your way of teaching. If you are a teacher and you cannot actually communicate well with your students, this is one of the noise that could actually affect your communication process. And then for the student receiver may not be ready yet to receive information or lack of skill. For example, you have 30 or 40 students in your class. Not all of them are happy. Not all of them are ready to receive the information. Some of them are sad, some of them are sick. So you need to make sure all of them are ready to receive the information before you move on and starting your lesson. And then we have the readiness to gain knowledge: morning, comfortable, noon, sleepy, evening. For example, you as a teacher, you go in the morning, very early in the morning, maybe 7:30 or 8 a.m. and starting to give them, a very big, solid information. This is not going to be actually understandable or good for them. You need to make sure, maybe do some activities first, and then make them ready to actually receive the information that you give them. And then the teacher's attitude itself. Teacher is actually always very important in education and in education process, because he is a role model to his students. You as a teacher needs to be aware of your attitude inside your class. Even outside your class in the school, if you are a smoker, do not smoke in front of your students, or else they will look you as a role model and they will look for smoking as something good. You need to, they actually might do it sometimes just to make sure that they are following you. So teacher attitude is very important in our communication process. And then we have students itself absent from the class, didn't do homework, etc. For us, homework and assignments, it's not just like something to do by the students, but it's a feedback. This is the feedback we as a teacher want to see, that our student able to understand, our students are able to do whatever they ask to do because they actually enjoy our classes. So we want to make sure this is actually kind of communication. And then we have the biological and physical factors that affect learning, such as mental problem, disabled, hearing, blind, and so on. And this is actually more to deal with some of the students with special needs. We need to be aware of their needs before we go further to actually speak or start our lesson. All right, what other factors that we need to be aware of other than the human factors? We have the technical factors. I want to make sure as a teacher I am able to use the media. I'm able to use the LCD. I'm able to use the laptop or the PC. I'm able to use the PowerPoint software. All right, and then the physical or the environmental. We need to make sure our environment is, for example, comfortable. There is no maintenance outside. There's no loud sounds and shouting and so on. etc. We have technical factors like, for example, the aircon is not working. So we need to make sure that all technical factors are okay before we even start in our communication process. And then we have problem with the message itself. For example, is if the message is not clear, if I'm talking in a strange language, if my language is not actually understandable, so I need to, for example, speak slowly, and I need to use the appropriate semantic, especially when I'm teaching in a different culture than my culture. And then I need to use familiar words rather than unfamiliar words, and this is actually based on the background or the culture of the receiver and so on. So this is actually one of the examples that we as a teacher need to be aware of. For example, if I'm presenting right now, I need to ask myself, does the teacher speak clearly? Is he speaking loud enough, not too fast, faces the class, avoids mannerisms like and all the time, blah 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 all the time. So you need to be clear and sound, and you need to speak understandable, make your voice clear. Do not hesitate during giving your class and so on. Is the teacher non-verbal communication suitable? Appropriate gesture and expressions. Moves around, eye contact with the whole class. You need to actually move around the class. You don't have to sit or stand in your place the whole time of the class. You need to sit around, try to actually make students more active, communicate with them in your eye contact and so on. So this actually one of the practices that I want you actually to read carefully, and these actually, if you answer these questions and read them carefully, your presentation will be more than perfect. All right, so you need to actually be aware of the presentation itself, your voice, the content, the message, the technical part of the your class, and then the use of teaching aids. What are you able to use this aid before you bring them to the class? As I mentioned, are you able to use the LCD or the PowerPoint slides? So all these factors can affect your communication process and can make it actually more effective in delivering your teaching and learning class. All right, finally, we during this class learn about the communication. What does it mean? What types of communication? What models of communication that commonly used, and what are the terms of the elements of these models, and how can we actually differentiate between each model of these models. What I want from you now, after watching this video, when we meet online next week, I'm going to be posting this question in e-learning by using one of the communication models. Just only pick one model and explain how can you relate it to the process of teaching and learning. For example, I want to use Shannon waiver model, and Shannon has 6 or 7 elements in his model. So what I want to do is I want to divide each model and relate it to myself. How I'm going to use, what are the source of information, what is the information itself, explain the information, what is the medium of the channel, how I'm going to actually send this information, what is the medium, and then whom are my audience that are going to receive this message, and how can I get their actually feedback. This is very important. The final stage is how can I get their feedback, because their feedback is actually an evaluation for my class. So if their feedback is good, I'm doing good. as a teacher. When I give you a quiz at the end of each class, actually, I don't want to waste your time. I just want to measure that. I want to make sure that you already have watched the video, understood the meaning of the video, so that you are doing well in my class. And that's very much it for today class. I hope you enjoyed, because I have. And then we will meet next week online to discuss even more. And please stay safe, and see you guys. Bye bye.